Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're diving into the world of Bitcoin and blockchain, using the basics of Bitcoins and blockchains by Antony Lewis as our guide. You want the essentials, the core knowledge without getting lost in the weeds, and I think we can deliver that for you.
Yeah, this book's got quite the reputation for breaking down complex ideas in a way that anyone can grasp, as long as they're, willing to think a bit. Yisho Liu over at CoinHako even said it's like required reading for his new team members.
Wow, that's high praise. I see Rob Finley from Next Money called it useful, usable, and enjoyable, which is a pretty good trifecta for any book, let alone one about Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And it's not just industry folks who see the value. Paul Griffin, who's at Singapore Management University, called it a great resource for getting the real deal on blockchain and crypto.
Okay, so we're off to a strong start with the source material. Colin Platt from the Blockchain Insider podcast was impressed by how clearly the author explains things.
Yeah, and Zenon Capron, who runs Capron Asia, pointed out how the book actually breaks things down and helps you see how these concepts play out in the real world.
Excellent. Tim Swanson from Post Oak Labs called it a helpful guide, and Greg Wolfson at Element Group called it engaging, clear, and authoritative. That's quite a string of endorsements.
It is.
Yeah.
And the last one I'll mention is Richard Gendel-Brown. He's the CTO of R3. And he said it cuts through all the hype and explains the fundamentals in a clear way. Sounds like we've got a solid foundation for this deep dive.
All right, so let's set out our mission here. We're going to unpack the core ideas behind Bitcoin and blockchain, see how Bitcoin measures up against traditional money, and explore the implications of this whole blockchain thing.
Think of it as a curated journey through the essentials.
I like that. So let's start with a basic question. What is money and where does Bitcoin fit in? The book kicks off with the standard academic definition, laying out three main functions.
Right, the classic definition. Money's got to be a medium of exchange, meaning it's widely accepted for payments and settling debts. Then there's store value, meaning it holds its worth over time.
And lastly, unit of account, meaning it's a common measure for comparing the value of different things. So with physical cash, it's pretty straightforward.
You hand over a banknote, transaction done. But with digital money, things get a little trickier. Before Bitcoin came along, you always needed a trusted third party in the mix.
Right, like with your bank account or PayPal, you're not directly controlling the money. You're relying on an intermediary to keep track of everything and move things around when you tell them to.
Exactly. Trust in that bookkeeper, that's key in traditional digital money systems. Bitcoin tries to flip that on its head. It wants to be digital money without needing that middleman.
So more direct control over your money, at least in theory. Now, the book brings up an interesting point from Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England. Back in 2018, he was pretty skeptical of Bitcoin as money.
Yeah, he basically said it failed on those traditional money aspects. Too volatile to be a reliable store of value, not widely accepted enough to be a good medium of exchange.
So Bitcoin's struggling to fit into those old school definitions, but the book makes a counter-argument. Maybe we're trying to shove Bitcoin into boxes, currency, asset, digital gold that it doesn't quite belong in.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The book suggests we need a new category, a new way to understand Bitcoin based on its own characteristics.
It also points out a possible conflict of interest when central bankers talk about decentralized money. Their job's all about keeping their fiat currencies stable, right?
Make sense? If something like Bitcoin took off, operating outside their control, it could make their job a lot harder. Their skepticism might be understandable from their perspective.
So Bitcoin's relationship with money is complicated, to say the least. Now, for some historical context, the book takes us on a quick tour of the history of money, suggesting Bitcoin might be part of a long evolution.
It's like a family tree, from bartering to what we have today. And understanding that journey helps us make sense of where crypto fits in.
First up, bartering my 5 sheep for your 20 bushels of corn, as the book puts it. Super inefficient.
Yeah, the double coincidence of wants problem. You need someone who has what you want, and they have to want what you have all at the same time. Rarely works beyond the most basic economies. Money stepped in as that universally accepted middle ground.
Then we get commodity money. The money itself is the valuable thing, like cattle, grain, or the book mentions silver in Cappadocia around 2200 BCE.
A shift towards something with more extrinsic value, something scarce and durable. That's interesting. Even back then, they were probably debating intrinsic value, like food, versus this new idea, extrinsic value.
That same debate's still raging around Bitcoin today. Then there's shell money, cowrie shells used in China way back in 1200 BCE, and get this, in parts of Africa up until the 1950s.
Shows you how diverse, how seemingly random early money could be. What matters is that a community agrees on its value.
The book mentions mixed metal coins from Lydia around 700, 600 BCE, made of electrum. Funny enough, one of the only Bitcoin wallets was named Electrum too.
A nice little historical nod. Coinage was a big step forward, making money more portable and divisible.
We even see early banking in Babylon around 3000, 2000 BCE, evolving from warehouses. And get this, Hammurabi's Code, an early form of regulation, is mentioned. The book contrasts that with libertarians who often dislike regulation but complain about crypto scams.
The need for rules, for someone to enforce them, it's age-old. Even with early money and banking, there was potential for fraud and disputes.
Currency pegs also pop up, like Alexander the Great trying to peg gold to silver and early attempts in America. The book points out how tricky those are to maintain, which is relevant to the whole stablecoin debate today.
Yeah, keeping those fixed exchange rates, whether between metals or fiat currencies, it's tough. Takes a lot of management and a big stockpile of reserves.
The book even brings up ragstones from Yap Island. Some see them as early fiat money, but Dror Goldberg argues against that, saying they had legal, historical, and sentimental value, not just a government stamp.
Shows that even with seemingly simple money forms, there's often more to the story than just a government saying, this is money. Social and cultural factors matter too.
And finally, we arrive at 2009, the birth of Bitcoin. Was it money right out the gate? The author says maybe not immediately, but maybe a crypto commodity or a crypto asset to begin with.
Back to needing a new bucket. Bitcoin shook things up, challenged our ideas of money in a digital world.
The book uses the example of grab credits for small transactions to introduce this idea of good enough money. I thought that was a really interesting way to put it.
Makes you think about practicality. What works for a quick everyday purchase might not cut it for a huge business deal. Different tools for different jobs.
Okay, so we've seen how money has always been changing. Let's dig into fiat currency, the dominant form today, the one Bitcoin's often compared to.
Fiat money, it gets its value from a government decree. Essentially, let it be done. No intrinsic value, not convertible into gold or anything like that. Banknotes might say, I promise to pay, but if you actually try to redeem it, you'll just get another banknote.
The book clarifies legal tender, meaning people are legally obliged to accept it for debts and taxes. But it also says not all notes and coins are legal tender in every situation, especially outside their own country.
Right. You wouldn't be forced to accept Russian rubles in the UK. And even within a country, there might be limits on how much small change you can use in a single transaction.
Yeah, the book uses examples from Singapore's Currency Act limits on coin usage and how the Brunei dollar is considered customary tender there.
Adds another layer of complexity to what we think of as legal tender.
Now, on to quantitative easing, or QE. The book sets the record straight. It's not just about printing more money.
It is about increasing the amount of fiat money out there to give a sluggish economy a boost. But instead of literally printing cash, central banks usually buy bonds from commercial banks, adding new digital money to the bank's reserves.
The worry, of course, is that this could devalue the existing currency.
Of course. And the book gives us that dramatic story of George Soros betting against the British pound in 1992, which played out within the European exchange rate mechanism.
A stark reminder of how hard it can be to maintain a currency peg when the market thinks it's overvalued. Soros had more financial firepower than the Bank of England at that point, forcing them to devalue the pound and withdraw from the ERM.
A powerful example of how market forces can clash with government attempts to control a currency's value.
With all this historical and definitional background, it's clearer why something like Bitcoin, operating outside these established systems, is so intriguing. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the tech behind Bitcoin and blockchain. The book stresses that Bitcoin is really a set of protocols.
At its heart, yeah, these protocols are the rules of the game. They define how ownership is represented, what makes a transaction valid, how new participants join the network, all that stuff.
And these rules are laid out in computer code, which is then compiled into the Bitcoin software.
Exactly. So instead of traditional bank accounts, Bitcoin uses these user-generated addresses derived from public keys.
The book highlights how this gives users more control over their money.
Right. You can create as many Bitcoin addresses as you need, and your wallet software keeps track of them. Importantly, to spend the Bitcoin at an address, you need the corresponding private key.
And that private key, that's the secret sauce, right?
It is. The book goes on about how improbable it is for someone to randomly generate a Bitcoin address that's already in use. It's like winning the lottery multiple times in a row.
Wow. Okay, so once a transaction is made, it gets broadcast to a whole network of bookkeepers, or nodes as they're called.
Decentralized, so the info spreads across the entire Bitcoin network. But this creates a new problem. How do all these geographically spread out bookkeepers agree on the order of transactions, especially with network delays and all?
That's the problem. Transaction ordering, the book talks about. Bookkeepers in different locations might see things happening slightly out of sync.
Exactly. So the solution is blocks. Instead of recording each transaction as it happens, Bitcoin bundles validated pending transactions into these blocks. These blocks are created at set intervals, much less frequent than the constant stream of transactions.
So like slowing down the data entry process to give the bookkeepers more time to get on the same page about the order.
Precisely. It's about reaching a consensus on the sequence of blocks, not every single transaction. Now, this brings up another big question. Who gets to create these blocks and how often?
If it was just one entity calling the shots, we'd be back to a centralized system defeating the purpose of Bitcoin. So enter mining.
Mining is the decentralized answer. It's a competition where block creators, or miners, try to solve a computationally challenging puzzle. They're searching for a piece of data, a nonce, that, when added to the other data in the block and then cryptographically hashed, results in a hash value that's below a set target.
So it's like a super complex puzzle, and the first miner to crack it gets to add the next block to the chain. But why would anyone go through all that effort?
That's where the incentive comes in. Two parts: transaction fees and the block reward. When you send a Bitcoin transaction, you usually include a small fee, which goes to the miner who adds your transaction to a block.
And on top of that, for each new block mined, the miner gets a reward in newly created Bitcoin. This is built into the protocol itself.
Right. It's their payment for keeping the network running.
Yeah.
Each block is then permanently linked to the previous block using cryptography, creating a tamper-proof chain. It's a chronological record of every Bitcoin transaction.
But what if two miners find valid blocks almost simultaneously? That's what the book calls the problem. Block clashes. How does the network decide which block wins?
Longest chain rule to the rescue. If there are competing chains, the network eventually settles on the longest one, the one with the most computational work behind it. This means it represents the most mining power, the biggest consensus.
This is why Bitcoin's blockchain is considered practically immutable. Changing a past transaction would mean recreating that block and all the blocks after it, then convincing most of the network that your new chain is the right one.
A Herculean task, to say the least. But the book does mention the theoretical 51% attack. If someone could control more than half of the network's mining power, they could potentially rewrite parts of the blockchain.
Scary thought, but the book says that achieving and maintaining that level of control on a network as big as Bitcoin's is extremely unlikely. Now, let's zoom in on how transactions work. The book introduces UTXOs, or unspent transaction outputs.
Think of them as specific chunks of Bitcoin you've received and haven't spent yet. Your Bitcoin balance isn't one big number. It's a bunch of these UTXOs from past transactions.
So when you make a payment, you're spending specific UTXOs, creating new ones for the recipient, maybe some change back to yourself, like paying with a bank note and getting smaller bills back.
A good way to visualize it. And each UTXO references the transaction that created it, making all Bitcoin traceable back to when they were first mined.
That traceability has big implications for privacy and regulation. The book also says malicious miners can't really do that much damage. Even if they try to sneak in a bogus transaction, the other nodes will likely reject it because it doesn't follow the rules.
It's all about network consensus. Honest nodes won't build on invalid blocks. A miner trying to cheat could find their blocks ignored, essentially cut off from the real chain.
So, a quick recap. A Bitcoin transaction starts with an instruction which UTXOs are being spent, from which address to which. This is created in your wallet software, signed with your private key, and broadcast to the network. Miners gather these valid transactions into blocks, compete to mine them, and the resulting blockchain is the permanent record.
And the book emphasizes that if a transaction isn't on the public blockchain, it basically didn't happen. No central authority to appeal to.
Yeah, no safety net there. It all relies on that distributed consensus. The book does point out that mining isn't perfectly decentralized in reality. A lot of the hashing power is concentrated in a few big mining entities, many in China.
That's a concern. This concentration could make the network more vulnerable to censorship or even a coordinated attack, although still very difficult.
Now, let's trace Bitcoin's intellectual roots. The book makes it clear. Bitcoin didn't appear out of thin air. It built on earlier ideas and technologies.
It was a clever fusion of concepts from cryptography and distributed systems. The book highlights several key predecessors.
First, DigiCash. David Chaum's brainchild from the 1980s focused on privacy-preserving digital cash. The book mentions its use of blind signatures and its commercial run as eCash, though the company eventually went under.
Chaum was a pioneer in digital anonymity. That idea of a bank issuing digitally signed cash that could be spent anonymously, a key precursor to some of Bitcoin's privacy features, even though the implementations are quite different.
Next, B-Money, a proposal from Wei Dai in 1998. The book describes it as an untraceable network with pseudonyms and distributed balance keeping.
B-Money's big contribution was envisioning a decentralized system for tracking and verifying balances. The pseudonyms, the encrypted communication, all these ideas resonate with Bitcoin's design.
Then there's e-gold, a centralized digital currency backed by actual gold. Popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, but ultimately shut down due to its role in illicit activities.
E-gold showed that there was a demand for digital value transfer, but it also highlighted the risks of centralized systems. Unlike Bitcoin, it had a central point of control, making it vulnerable to regulation and misuse.
The book surprisingly mentions Napster, the peer-to-peer music sharing platform that got shut down for copyright issues.
What's relevant here is Napster's peer-to-peer architecture. It did rely on central servers, which made it susceptible to takedowns, but it showed the potential of decentralized networks for sharing information directly. Its successor, BitTorrent, did an even better job of this.
Right, BitTorrent. The book praises it as a resilient system, hard to censor because there's no single point of failure.
That contrast between Napster and BitTorrent, it illustrates a key principle. Decentralization makes a system more resistant to censorship and takedowns, and that's a core part of Bitcoin's philosophy.
And then, in October 2008, the Bitcoin white paper appears, authored by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto and distributed through the cypherpunk mailing list. The book reminds us that cypherpunks were all about using strong cryptography for social and political change.
They laid the groundwork, both ideologically and technologically, for Bitcoin. The white paper was a culmination of their efforts in cryptography and digital currencies.
Let's move on to Bitcoin's early days. The book walks us through some of the key milestones and the gradual adoption process.
The very first Bitcoin was mined on January 3, 2009, the network's birthday. Early adoption was slow, but a few events stand out.
On January 7, 2011, 12 BTC were traded for the equivalent of 300 trillion Zimbabwean dollars. Of course, the book points out that this was mainly because of Zimbabwe's crazy hyperinflation at the time.
Yeah, a stark illustration of how unstable fiat currencies can be and why people might look for alternatives.
Then, on February 9, 2011, Bitcoin reached parity with the US dollar on the Mt. Gox exchange. A symbolic moment, for sure.
Showed that Bitcoin was starting to gain real-world value compared to established currencies.
Sadly, the Mt. Gox story ends badly. It was sold to Mark Karplus in March 2011, and we all know it eventually collapsed in 2014. A lot of people lost a lot of Bitcoin.
A harsh lesson about the early risks of crypto exchanges and the need for strong security and regulations.
But there were positive developments, too. In April 2011, Verwox, a platform that mostly dealt with exchanging fiat currencies and Linden dollars from the Second Life online world, integrated Bitcoin.
That was interesting. Maybe the first time an exchange linked a virtual currency with another virtual currency directly. A glimpse of Bitcoin's potential in digital economies.
Then came the Wired article on the Silk Road in June 2011. This really put Bitcoin on the map, though unfortunately in the context of an illegal online marketplace.
Right. The Silk Road used Bitcoin as its main form of payment. This definitely boosted Bitcoin's visibility and transaction volume, but it also linked it to illegal activity in the public eye.
And the book reminds us that Bitcoin's price, like any asset, is driven by supply and demand.
Simple economics at play. Okay, so we've covered the early days. Now, how do people actually use Bitcoin? Let's talk addresses and wallets. The book describes how a Bitcoin address is created, starting from a private key.
4 steps. You start with a private key, a long, randomly generated number. Then, through some math magic, that private key generates a public key.
The public key is then hashed twice. That's a cryptographic process to create the final Bitcoin address. That's what you share to receive payments.
And that private key, you got to keep that safe, right? It's like the combination to a safe holding your Bitcoin.
Exactly. Lose it, and you've lost access to your Bitcoin. The book stresses how ridiculously unlikely it is that someone else will randomly generate the same private key as you.
So, onto wallets. The book gives examples of software wallets like blockchain.info, Electrum, Jack, Spread Wallet.
But it smartly advises listeners to do their own research, because any software can have bugs or security flaws.
Right. Software wallets are convenient. You install them on your computer or phone, but they're considered hot wallets because the private keys are stored on devices that are online, making them more vulnerable.
They are often open source, so the code can be checked by the community, which helps. But for serious security, the book suggests hardware wallets like Trezor or Ledger Nano.
These keep your private keys offline on a separate device. Less convenient, but much safer, especially for larger amounts of cryptocurrency.
Right. The book then explains this idea of hot versus cold wallets, using the analogy of cryptocurrency exchanges. They keep a small portion of their Bitcoin in hot wallets for quick customer withdrawals.
Like a bank keeping some cash on hand, most of the Bitcoin is in cold storage, offline, and secure.
A good balance of liquidity and security. So how do you get Bitcoin in the first place? The book talks about buying, selling, and trading, mostly through exchanges.
Cryptocurrency exchanges act like marketplaces where you can buy or sell Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies using fiat currency or other crypto.
They match buyers and sellers, settle the transactions, and act as custodians, holding both fiat and crypto on behalf of users.
Typically, you create an account, deposit funds, place buy or sell orders, and then withdraw your crypto to an external wallet if you want. Prices are usually shown in trading pairs like BTC/USD.
It's important to remember that these exchanges are based in different countries, so the regulations and what currencies they support will vary.
Okay, now for the big mystery. Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin who vanished in December 2010 and whose real identity remains unknown.
One of the biggest enigmas in crypto. The book mentions that Satoshi supposedly holds around 1 million Bitcoin. Imagine the impact on the market if those were ever moved. People are watching those addresses like hawks.
Over the years, there have been lots of attempts to unmask Satoshi, to dox them, as they say in the industry, but the book is doubtful about the accuracy of any of those claims.
Right. It specifically mentions that Newsweek article that wrongly fingered Dorian Nakamoto as Satoshi. And then there's Craig Wright, who keeps claiming he's Satoshi but hasn't really proven it.
Maybe Satoshi was a pseudonym for a group of people, as the book suggests. Some names often thrown around are Hal Finney, Nick Szabo, Wei Dai, Jed McCaleb, and Dave Kleiman, who has sadly passed away.
There was speculation that the Tulip Trust, supposedly containing a lot of Kleiman's early Bitcoin, might shed some light on Satoshi's identity when it became accessible in 2020.
But that came and went without any big revelations. Okay, let's move beyond Bitcoin. What about Ethereum and the broader potential of blockchain? The book introduces Ethereum as another big public blockchain with its own cryptocurrency, Ether.
And Ethereum's differentiator is its ability to run smart contracts. Unlike Bitcoin, which was mainly meant for peer-to-peer payments, Ethereum was designed to be more versatile.
A platform for building decentralized applications, or dApps, using smart contracts. But it still has a lot of similarities with Bitcoin. Protocols, software, transactions, a blockchain.
Right. It's public and permissionless. Anyone can join. Though the book points out that you can create private permission versions of Ethereum too, mainly for businesses. It also uses a proof-of-work mining algorithm called Ethosh.
Though as with Bitcoin, specialized mining hardware has emerged, leading to some centralization of mining power.
It's an ongoing challenge. Now, on to the key differences between Ethereum and Bitcoin. One of the biggest is the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM.
Basically a virtual computer that runs on every full node in the network, executing transactions and the code in those smart contracts.
Keeps the whole Ethereum blockchain in sync. Think of Ethereum as a replicated state machine. All the nodes agree on the current state after each transaction.
Another difference is the programming language for creating smart contracts. Ethereum's is way more advanced and easier to use than Bitcoin's scripting language. The book also introduces this concept of gas in Ethereum.
Gas measures the computational effort needed to do things on the network, especially running smart contracts. Transaction fees are paid in Ether, and the amount depends on how much gas is used and the current gas price.
It's a way to prevent spam and make sure people pay for using network resources. There's also a difference in how Ethereum handles blocks that aren't part of the main chain.
In Bitcoin, those orphan blocks are just discarded, but Ethereum has uncles, or more accurately, Amr blocks. These are valid blocks that miss the main chain, but are still referenced by later blocks.
So miners of uncle blocks, and those who include them in their blocks, still get a smaller reward.
Right. It encourages faster block creation and doesn't waste as much computational work.
The way new Ether is created is also more complex than Bitcoin's fixed schedule. The book mentions the pre-mine in 2014, where Ether was sold to fund development. Then there's the ongoing issuance through block rewards and uncle rewards.
And the issuance rate has been adjusted over time to try and balance supply and demand.
So about the smart contracts, they're basically code uploaded to specific addresses on the blockchain. When you send Ether to that address, it triggers the code.
Think of them as self-executing contracts, but written in code. Once on the blockchain, they're there to stay, and you interact with them by sending transactions.
The book gives the example of a simple token creation contract called GavCoin and a real-world one with the Endorse ICO tokens.
Smart contracts have a lot of potential. They're Turing complete, which means they can theoretically perform any computation that any other programming language can.
Gives Ethereum a lot more flexibility than Bitcoin. The book then recounts the infamous the DAO hack in 2016. Millions of dollars worth of Ether were stolen due to a vulnerability in a smart contract.
A huge blow, and it led to a very controversial decision to hard fork the Ethereum blockchain to recover the stolen funds.
This split the community. Some believed in absolute blockchain immutability no matter what. Others thought it was necessary to fix this injustice.
This led to the creation of Ethereum Classic, which stuck to the original unforked chain. A big debate about the principles of blockchain.
The book also mentions the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, or EEA. They're trying to adapt Ethereum for use by large companies, but how exactly they'll do that is still a work in progress.
It's an attempt to bridge the gap between the open, public Ethereum and the needs of businesses who want more control and privacy. Now let's talk about forks. The book clarifies that this word has two meanings in crypto.
It can mean copying and modifying a project's code, which happens a lot in open source software development.
Right. And in crypto, that can lead to completely new cryptocurrencies based on the code of an existing one.
The other meaning is a chain split, when a live blockchain splits in two, usually because of disagreements about rules or upgrades.
It can happen accidentally because of bugs or network problems. Those are usually resolved quickly.
But deliberate chain splits are more interesting. This is when a big chunk of the network intentionally adopts new rules, creating two separate chains.
Often happens when there are fundamental disagreements about the future of the project.
Yeah.
The book says those media comparisons to stock splits are misleading. It's more like a spin-off in the financial world.
Right, where shareholders in a company get shares in a newly created independent company. Okay, on to security. The book really hammers home the importance of private keys in the crypto world. It contrasts this with traditional online banking, where you have usernames and passwords.
In online banking, if you forget your password, you can usually reset it. But in crypto, losing your private key means losing your crypto, period.
No reset button. The book makes it clear you are responsible for your private keys. Now let's talk about different types of tokens. The book broadly categorizes them into native blockchain tokens, like BTC and ETH, asset-backed tokens, and utility tokens.
Native tokens are the core cryptocurrencies of their blockchains, used for things like paying transaction fees and incentivizing miners. Asset-backed tokens represent a claim on a real-world asset, like gold, real estate, or company shares.
It's like a digital version of a stock certificate or a deed to a property. Then there are utility tokens, which give you access to a product or service.
Often used as a way to pre-sell a product or service or offer a kind of membership.
To show the limits of applying blockchain to physical things, the book gives this funny example of PigChain, a blockchain for tracking sausage ingredients.
A good illustration of how you can't guarantee the accuracy of data before it goes onto the blockchain. A blockchain only records what it's told, not necessarily the truth.
The book also provides a more formal categorization of different cryptocurrencies, with examples like privacy-focused coins like Monero, platform tokens like Ethereum, and utility tokens like Augur and Siacoin.
Helps to make sense of the vast and growing world of crypto assets. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the term blockchain technology itself.
The book points out that there's no single, universally agreed upon definition.
It's a bit of a buzzword, honestly, but the book lays out some common characteristics.
Things like a shared, distributed ledger, records linked into blocks using cryptography, immutability, data replication, and often a peer-to-peer network.
Right. And it's important to distinguish between permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are open to everyone, and permissioned blockchains, which are more controlled and typically used by businesses.
Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges and risks in this whole crypto world. The book starts with the difficulty of figuring out what cryptocurrencies are actually worth.
It's tough. Unlike traditional assets, there are no standard valuation methods for cryptocurrencies and ICO tokens. It's often driven by speculation and market sentiment.
Then there's the use of crypto on darknet markets for illegal activities. The book cites the Force and Bridges case as an example of the legal consequences.
A reminder that law enforcement is paying attention, and if you use crypto for illegal things, you can get caught.
The book addresses the claim that crypto is used for large-scale money laundering. It suggests that traditional methods are probably still more popular for that because they're bigger and more liquid.
It's not that crypto can't be used for money laundering, but the traditional system is still likely the main avenue for big operations.
The book also points out risks with private blockchains, especially if those in control misbehave.
Right. Trust becomes a bigger issue in permission systems.
It also cautions against the hype around all these blockchain experiments happening across industries.
A lot of them might just be regular digitization projects with a blockchain sticker slapped on them.
Then there are ICOs, initial coin